Welcome to T-Bone's Best of Roanoke show. Music, comedy, and conversation featuring HB, the Honey Badger.
Honey Badger don't care.
Now, on with the show.
And we're back. Part 2 of Vikings of the Valley with our friends Jeff Rigdon, John Rigdon, Matt Melling, and we're going to talk about myths, movies, and more. Enjoy. Well, Vikings 101. What were the age of Vikings first, and then if you had to say, well, these countries typically make up Scandinavia or the Viking countries, what will give us the time frame that the age of Vikings was prominent, and then what countries?
The first noted Viking attack was on a monastery at Lindisfarne.
That's in England, Scotland?
Correct, England, and that was in 793. And then the Viking Age effectively goes to 1066.
Essentially
to 1066.
That's where Battle
Hastings.
killed?
That's Battle of Hastings.
Now there are records and tales and histories of tradesmen that sailed those seas long before the Viking Age. So in Scandinavian countries, there's a history that predates the Viking Age, before Vikings were a thing.
That's called the Vendel era.
All right.
Vendel era. Now that's 750 is a prominent time because there was a great battle in 750. The Battle of Bravlir. Harold Wartooth gathered all the great heroes so that he could die in battle. He was in his late 70s, and his cousin or nephew, Sigurd Ring, who is said to be the father of Ragnar Lothbrok, which is a famous name in Viking history, went to war with each other. Harold was eventually killed by Odin so that he could take him up to Valhall.
That's where all the great heroes stayed in that hall, right?
Valhall.
Now, if I had to say, well, this was the main countries in Europe, would it be Sweden, Norway, and Denmark?
Correct. Those would be the three primaries. Then, after the Viking era began, then migration. Now, what is not well known is we know a lot about the West. The Vikings went west. They went to England. They went to Ireland. They went to France. As you mentioned, they actually made it to Spain and into the Mediterranean Sea. Went to actually attacked a city in Italy that they thought was Rome. It was actually Luna. And because of all the marble, they didn't know. So they attacked it. They used a ruse to get in. They told the bishop that their leader was wounded in battle, wanted to be baptized and buried on sacred ground. So they took him up to it. Once they got inside, they attacked him and killed him. Killed the bishop right on the spot.
Another Trojan
town.
Yes.
They were clever people.
So after that, Iceland, the Hebrides, the Orkneys, the Faroe, all of those islands were colonized. A good portion of Scotland, the western portion primarily, but also that which is associated with the Orkney Islands, all of that was incorporated. As I said, with Ireland, the coastal cities that were founded were all founded by Vikings. Wales, of course, England, of course. In 866, eventually, in 866, the Great Heathen Army, to avenge the death of Ragnar Lothbrok, they came over with they say about 10,000, which was a huge army at that time, and conquered most of England to become what is segmented out as the Danelaw. Again, they were called Danes because a lot of them were Danes, but then that became a common name for everybody. But there were others that were used, of course.
Have you guys ever had a chance yet to go back to the motherland of Norway or Sweden or Denmark yet? Would you like to go?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, eventually.
Yeah, there are spiritual centers. Again, it's deep. I'm a heathen. Heathen is those who follow the old path. Odin is my god. Thor is my god. You had mentioned in one of your messages about Thor, the comic book Thor.
Yeah.
Well, we're of an age. Comic book Thor came out in 1962. I was 8 years old. He was the first superhero that wasn't based on radiation or from a foreign planet, and really Stan Lee, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who ran Marvel Studios or Marvel, the comic book group. These are two Jewish men who knew the mythology and honored it initially.
I had a conversation with our brother John last night. He was by the house, and we were actually discussing, You know, the early renditions of Thor in the comic books was a level of tribute paid to the origins of the story, whereas honestly now it's a little bit corrupted and it's not the same as it used to be. But
It's jumped the shark.
Early
absolutely.
on, it was definitely a tribute to the mythology and its origins.
And I remember Asgard. They would go to Asgard, and there was an evil half brother, Loki.
Not a brother. Actually, he's an oath brother
Okay.
to Odin.
Okay. All right. So this gentleman then, who's so mischievous and maybe a little bit of a troublemaker, his name is Loki.
Yeah, Loki. Loki's a tough one. He's actually a Jotun. Now there are different tribes of the Norse gods or beings, the immortal beings. There's the Aesir, which includes Odin and Thor and the ones that we mostly know about. Then there's the Vanir, which they're more what you would consider the agricultural, mercantile deities. That would be Njord and Freya and Frey, which are father and children. And then there's the Jotuns. Now the Jotuns are also called the Frost Giants or the Hrimthursar. They're the big bad ones. Although they also are the ones, the females, that primarily the Aesir and the Vanir marry. Mm-hmm. So they're not ugly, horrible creatures. They just have a cold heart. Because they're the ancestors, direct ancestors of the first primordial being, Ymir, which is essentially, conceptually, the glacier.
Oh.
Mythologies are based on environment.
Yeah.
You're not going to have stories about jungles in Scandinavia.
Right. Yeah.
It's not that environment, but they had glaciers at one time. So when you think about the people first moving into that area, what was the first thing that they were confronted with? Glaciers. Well, as the glaciers melted, the land was brought forth, and that's what the mythology tells us. Except Odin, Vili, and Vi, his two brothers, slayed Ymir, bringing forth the world that we have. Not just our world, known as Midgard, but the 9 realms that all are connected via Yggdrasil, the world tree. Loki is a direct descendant of Ymir. He's of royal status. He becomes an oath brother to Odin. Odin seeks him to gain knowledge. Odin is a seeker of knowledge. Turns out Loki was a preeminent shapeshifter. He could change into any kind of creature. Odin wanted to learn that from him. And in the course of their travels, they became oath brothers. In the comic books and in the movies, Loki is shown to be the brother, stepbrother, half-brother, adopted brother of Thor. That's not the way it worked. It wasn't like that at all. Most of the stories in our mythologies incorporate Loki. Loki brings forth a problem and solves a problem. And sometimes that problem bites him in the butt. There's a good example of that. Loki, there was a battle between the Aesir and the Vanir. And in the course of it happening, the walls of Asgard were brought down. Then they reached a treaty, and this character comes along and says, hey, I'll rebuild your walls for you. All I want is the sun and the moon and the stars and the hand of Freya, the goddess of lust and beauty and enchantment.
All I want is
price was
everything.
The price was too steep.
So they all say, no, I don't think so. And then Loki steps up and says, let him do it. I'll guarantee he won't finish this. And there's no way he could finish it. Let's give him a set time period. So they gave him half a year, 6 months to get this done. So Freya was not too happy about this arrangement. So it started going off. He brought in this horse that was huge horse. Incredibly. Think of a Percheron or a Clydesdale, but huge, bigger, much bigger, elephant size. And it just would pull these huge megalithic stones into place. Day after day, the walls are going up. Freya was heavily involved in what was going to happen. She was not going to allow this to happen to her. She was not happy. And she's perhaps the third, if not second, most powerful deity of all the gods. As powerful as Thor. So it's coming down and everybody's really angry and they're threatening Loki's life because he's the one that brought this deal about and what are you going to do about it? And so he goes to Freya and asks her advice. What can we do to? And I don't want to die. And what can we do to solve this problem? She goes, lure the stallion away. He can't finish the wall without the stallion. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, you're a shapeshifter. Turn yourself into a female horse. Turn yourself into a mare. And go into estrus and lure him away. But I can't do that. I've never done that before. I've never changed gender. I've always been able to change into any animal, but I can't change gender. I'm a male. I can't change. She goes, well, I'm the mistress of Sither magic, woman's magic.
We will make
I'll
it work.
help you. Well, it worked. Loki came running out of this beautiful little filly, and estrus was flying, and the horse caught wind, and Loki took off, and the stallion took off, and the giant wasn't able to complete the wall. He got angry, turned into the giant, which he wasn't. He was a shapeshifter. Turned into a giant, threatened to destroy Asgard, and Thor showed up. He had been away on adventures, and he slayed the giant. Well,
Loki didn't.
There's a problem with that. Now.
Loki didn't come back, by the way.
No, not right away. But there's a problem with what Thor did. Number one, Asgard's sacred ground, and they broke trust. They broke an oath. They said that they would do this. It was a deal. This is sacred. You don't do these things. The giants never forgot that. Never forgot that the gods did this. So Loki runs for days and days and days, luring the stallion away.
Right.
And finally, he says, okay, it was far enough, and he tries to change back. Can't change back. Because he's in estrus. He can't change back. He can't until that cycle ends. The stallion catches him, mounts him, and mates with him.
Oh, Lord.
Months later, Loki shows up with an 8-legged steed. He doesn't tell anybody where it came from.
Look what I picked up.
He says, hey, here's a gift, Odin. You're my blood brother, oath brother. I want you to have this. Then he goes and finds Freya. He says, what happened? Now, sheepishly, because he knows that she's still angry with him for having put her in this horrible situation. And she explains to him, she says, if I'd had to go with him, I would have died. I could not have lived with this being. So I neglected to tell you that you couldn't change back until your time ended. But I did think you might be able to outrun him. But I was hoping you couldn't.
So more times than are mentioned, the Loki, god of mischief, has been screwed.
Yes.
And in more ways than one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a fine story.
Yeah.
I've never heard that one before. Well, as we get ready.
Well, there's a reason for that. It's never been told before.
And then, as a result of this, you get the birth of one of our story's greatest mystical creatures, Slepner, the 8-legged horse that could run on sky as he could run on earth, as he could run on water. No path he could not trot over. He would always carry his rider to a destination without fail.
Anywhere
Wow.
on the Yggdrasil is Odin's steed. One of Odin's name is Ygg or Ygr. So Yggdrasil, the cosmic tree, the tree of life, connects to all the 9 realms. Slepner can go anywhere in the 9 realms.
Well, I'm
Over
gonna be on the lookout for 8-legged animals.
Yeah.
I have an idea where they came from.
There is a statue. I think there's one statue, and I think it's in Kiev. I could totally be wrong. Of an 8-legged Slepner.
See?
Okay.
Oh, well, as we get ready for the big finish here, is there any movies out there that might, they might stretch things a little bit, but it tells a fun, dramatic story about Vikings? Is there any movies maybe from 1964? Richard Widmark, Sidney Poitier?
Might there be? Let's think about this. Let's see. We're of a similar age. I
Yes.
think there was a movie that came out with Richard Widmark and
Sidney Poitier.
Sidney Poitier, and I think it was called The Long Ships.
Oh,
Oh, and there it is.
oh really?
Yeah.
This is actually the second most famous movie of the era that's based on Vikings. The first one was called The Vikings with Kirk Douglas. and Ernest Borgnine,
Tony
and
Curtis.
Tony Curtis,
Really?
and Janet
I'll
Leigh.
check that out.
Have you seen that one?
no.
You haven't seen the Vikings?
No.
This is a story.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah, this is a story of Ragnar Lothbrok. The names of his children are changed. I had the book. I loaned it out to somebody, and I don't have it with me now. And there was a follow-up novel with it as well. Kirk Douglas bought the rights to it, made the movie.
Okay.
He paid to have the movie made. He supported the whole venture. He produced the whole venture. It was his dream to do it, and he did it, and he did it very well. It's a love story. But everything in it is Viking. It's there's a very famous scene where Kirk Douglas, as they're coming into port, which, just as a sideline, the reason we have nautical terms like port and steer, the starboard, is because of where the steerboard was on the side of the ship. Steerboard became starboard. Port is the side that you would dock. So that's where those terms came from. That's where those terms came from. So he gets out. They had leveled their oars out straight out from the ship. He got out on the back of the ship onto the oars and did an oar walk, walking on the oars over the water, from oar to oar to oar. And other people did it as well. Most of them slipped and fell into the water.
But he really
they
did it.
really did this.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kirk Douglas really did this, and fell in the water, and it was cold because it was an actual a fjord. So that's one of them. Today, there are many. There are many. The 13th Warrior is another one. That's a Beowulf story written by Michael Crichton.
Pathfinder.
Pathfinder is another one. There's many of them. Outlander is kind of a Beowulf story with an alien or outer worldly being in it
Space
as
Viking.
well. So it's kind of a combo story, but it's very well done, and the set pieces are perfect. And there's a famous scene in that where the key character does what we call a shield walk. They're in a great hall. It's a challenge between he and another individual, and they have to get up on top of the shields, which are supported by each warrior's shoulder, their shoulder height. And so they go racing each other around the room and drinking as they're doing it from their drinking horns. But today, Lord of the Rings, all based on Norse mythology.
The Rohirrim.
The Rohirrim.
I mean, if
That-
you want to
that-
see a
yeah.
Viking village, look at Rohan. I mean, they have a longhouse, their great hall. They have all the A-frame buildings.
It's
with
on the
dragon
high,
heads.
and it's located on the high ground in the middle of a great valley.
Yep.
So it's tactically placed.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
There's the Vikings television series that came
heard
out, which is really, for a lot of people, started their interest in Vikings.
Yeah.
And now it's a continuation with the Vikings Valhalla, which tells the story of Harald Hardrada, which is the last Viking king that was actually a Christian, but he still was, everything about him was Viking.
Yep.
He was maybe the greatest warrior of his time, actually served in the Varangian Guard, was a general of the Varangian troops for the Byzantine Emperor. And so he was in the Mediterranean serving the emperor, amassed a huge fortune, went back to Norway, and bought half the kingdom from his nephew.
That's right.
In 1066, he met his end at Stamford Bridge. And now the Harold that you're thinking of is Harold Godwinson, who was a Saxon. He died at Hastings 2 weeks later. The reason he lost, he's the one that killed, or his army killed, Harald Hardrada, the last Norwegian Viking king. If he hadn't had to fight Harald Hardrada, he probably could have defeated William the Conqueror.
Right.
Who would not have been the conqueror, he'd just be William the Bastard, nobody would even know about it.
Wow. All right, well, let's get ready here. I'm going to touch on each one of you real quickly, and then if you have anything else I've left out, bring it up. But, Split, you've got a podcast that you do. It's called, tell us about, give us the thumbnail of that.
Locking Horns was kind of a brain concept put together a couple of years ago. For the longest time, we sit down and we spend time with brothers and sisters, and we tell our stories, and we share time together, and that's the biggest thing. That's one big piece about it. But everybody kind of wants to have a chance to tell their story. Okay, so I enjoy conversations with people that are telling their story. 90% of us are converts from a previous faith. What was your childhood like? How did you grow up? What was daily routine? What preceded the path for you to become heathen? What's your story? And it's a really good kind of like platform just to like, let somebody, this is who I am, this is where I came from, this is how I think. Good time for just conversations, just like get to know somebody and let them tell their story, and brings out the ideas of why we are heathen, why we chose this faith, why we chose this way of life, and why we continue to try to send that to our children as well. So it's a small project. We started, like I said, about a year and a half ago. I think I've got 12 interview videos up, but it's a process. And right now, I have dived into the Havamal, which is a text from the Codex Regius, which is effectively the words of the High One. Havi, the High One, meaning Odin.
Okay.
These are a collection of poems and individual stanzas that give us a really good way at looking at the way life was, and a good way to live your life now. It applied then, it applies now. The contexts are a bit different. Of course, we're not, not the same peoples that we were then. So how does the Havamal apply in daily life? And then I've recently started re-diving back into the Icelandic sagas and learning more in depth about the people, how they lived, what they did, what was their way of life, and does that way of life still translate to our modern age? And I think it does. So that's a piece of the podcast.
So there's a lot there.
Locking Horns.
Locking Horns podcast.
On Horns podcast. All right, then John, you got a project.
Well, one thing before you do that, horns.
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 The concept behind locking horns in the name was you come together and you debate with somebody at a table like this, and you speak your mind, and you are mentally locking horns with each other. You're not necessarily fighting, but you're coming together,
give and take,
metaphorically, and locking horns. When we come together and drink and we make a toast, it is a locking of horns.
Okay.
So the concept behind the name is a coming together.
Okay.
Nice.
Cool. Very nice.
All right, John, you got a project. What's that?
Yeah, so I'm building a park called Viking Land. And so we've talked about all the programs we've done for the last 15 or so years.
Yeah.
And it's always a big hit. I mean, for all ages. So we do preschool, and then we're also working with college kids and adults. I mean, grandparents love this. But it's not fully immersive. So, we go on site somewhere. We're either at Roanoke College or at, Elmwood Park or in a parade. My goal, my vision is to bring these people that are interested in what we're doing to a location that's fully immersive, so that we have a Viking ship that kids can get on, and we're going to row them around in a big pond or lake. We're going to have a longhouse. We're going to have a bar where you're drinking mead out of horns and ale, and of course we're going to pour it. Not the kids. So stuff for adults, stuff for kids. It's going to be something to bring families together of all ages, and just show them our way of life and enjoy. So we're teaching them things, but it's in a fun way, and being getting all the schools involved. So I envision field trips and getting kids out of a stuffy classroom. And you can't learn history.
Get them out, let them live.
It's fun too, and they'll enjoy it and learn.
And most kids, if not all of them, will remember it.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember as a kid going to Colonial Williamsburg.
I do too. Yeah.
Okay. So why not?
And that's a model for what it's called, living history. And so that's what we're going to do. We're all going to be in our garb, in our armor, walking around, interacting with people, and it's just.
Oh yeah.
It's going to be like a little
like
a fairy
some
tale
livestock,
land.
The barn, the necessities.
I just want to keep, I loved the myths, the legends, the fairy tales, all that growing up as a kid. So my goal in life is to make that my job,
Yeah.
or I can, and obviously my dad was an inspiration for that, because he's just been, playing dress up,
Yeah.
for the last 20 years. Like he found a way to.
Well, speaking of that, to close out on that, Jeff, St. Patrick's Day Parade is about 2 months away.
Yeah.
You ready for some good Irish coffee?
Buddy,
Huh?
we start our day, before we start, we gather and we catch a buzz before we start.
Uh-huh.
And not overly intoxicated, just lift our spirits, and then we share it with those around us. What we want to do with any of the festivals or events or educational programs, or, for example, this was given to us to honor my daughter and my granddaughter. They each got one from the St. Brendan Society. They're the Sealy princesses of the festival. Now, St. Brendan Society,
Very cool.
Irish, but they honor us. They honor us because of the moments in time that we share. And everything, as I mentioned at the very beginning, what we are here, what we're about, are moments in time,
Yes.
memories.
Memories.
Now, I've done hundreds of educational programs. I had people walk up to me because I've been here for a long time, adults. Are you the guy that did that program?
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I remember that. In fact, it was one of my best days.
Oh, wow.
See, how's that make you
cool.
feel?
Moments in time.
Yeah.
Moments in time. I don't remember them. I don't remember the event. After a time, doing this a long time.
Yeah,
I'm almost
that's-
70 years old. I can't remember.
Yeah.
They have a tendency to all flow into one big
Oh,
ball
yeah.
of memories and events and festivals. When we get into a conversation about one, a memory will start to kick
Pull
in,
it
but
out,
otherwise,
yeah.
no. So, we are attached through history, culture, heritage. My whole intent was to give my children an example to live by. We're not cowboys. No, we're not Vikings, but there's a way of life that's similar to the way of life of cowboys. We're not pioneers, but the Viking way of life is very similar to what the pioneers had.
Right.
We're not mountain men, but the Vikings sure did look like mountain men and had the same tools and equipment other than firearms. History. How deep does your history go, and how can you relate it to today's world? That's what we're all about. For example, I found out recently that we have a celebrity at the table. Somebody who's actually related to someone we conquered.
Oh,
This is the story of
Yeah, could you?
King MacAlpine. Kenneth MacAlpine was the first king of Scotland, the first established king of Scotland.
Scotland forever.
Yeah. Constantine was also a king of Scotland. He died in 877 at the age of 41. So you've outlived him at least. But he was slain in battle in Scotland by the Vikings. Now, the Vikings were attacking Scotland constantly. Many of the Scottish clan names are Viking origin. MacLeod is a Viking name. There's many others.
Well, and the red hair was that was introduced by the Viking Scandinavian genetics, because most the Scots, the Picts, Celts, they typically are dark-haired people. They have brown hair. So the red hair is actually coming from Scandinavia.
We have found in our lineage and in the lineage of others, you had mentioned Normandy at the beginning and attacking Paris. Well, my last name is of Norman origin. So that's our attachment. So John, that helmet, that conical helmet with the nasal guard, typical Norman. That sword, that other sword, that's a Norman sword. So what I represent in our mythology and our history is I represent the Vindel area, 750, the Battle of Brivelere, Harold Wartooth's battle. I represent that. Then we have other people within our association that represent the Viking Age from 793 up until the second attack of Paris, which was in 885, because their armament changed. Their weapons changed a little bit, but there are segmented changes. So we have 4 periods of Viking history that we put on display with armor, helmets, weapons, and the history that goes along with it. And then what we can do is tap into those people that may share that history, that culture, that heritage.
Now, what's the story on?
I can sum it up real quickly. We were living in Scotland. My ancestors were having a happy time, and cows and whatever. And then these folks pulled up in these long ships, and mayhem ensued.
Yeah.
I don't know if there were any berserkers there or whatever, but we had a fight, and my relative. King Donald II was, it says in my book there, was killed by the Norse. So it's good to know that after all those years, as the ancestors of two different sides, we're back together
Sit
again.
down at a table.
Hand me that mic real quick.
We got the Scots, the Irish, and the Vikings all sitting at the same table, essentially.
All right. So,
This has been so good and so educational, and I wish you nothing but the best with your podcast, with your theme park, and with your parade, my friend, and all the stuff that you do. Thank you for all the education you
y'all.
provide the schools and the kids, everybody.
It's my privilege to do this. I've always looked at it that way. You're given a gift, share your gift. We have a concept, gift for gift. Now, when we came in, we greeted each other. Put your right arm out. Now, this is how we shake hands.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now, the reason for it, if I'm helping you into the boat
Yes, sir.
and we slip, that
Still
doesn't
okay.
slip.
Got to back up.
That wrist, that won't slip, and I can still get you on the boat. The other thing is make sure you got
They're clever people. They're clever. All right, man, go get them.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Most welcome. It's enjoyable.
Skull. Is that right?
Skull.
Skull.
Skull.